What's up, guys? I got my college football and NFL videos up for the week, so you can check those out. Tonight there is a bunch of action. Not a huge card, but some action kind of across the board. There is an NFL game, which I did talk about in my video. Panthers, Bears, horrendous, hideous game where both of these teams last week probably looked worse than they actually are. Really, they both had a ton of turnovers that massively factored into their games last week. The Bears are sitting at around a 3-point favorite, 53% of the cash and the tickets at this point. I lean against the Bears only because they're coming off a bigger game than the Panthers are. Or the Bears, even though they committed 5 turnovers, they actually totally dominated New Orleans statistically in that game. Should have won the game outright probably, but the turnovers were just insane. But that's a tougher game, a tougher opponent. They almost won as a big underdog. So I think they're in the worst situation coming off of that, whereas the Panthers had more of kind of an embarrassment, losing to the Colts by 14, which was basically all in pick sixes thrown by Bryce Young. I think that's more of a situation where a team's going to want to refocus and bounce back from that, whereas the Bears might be kind of down on themselves a little bit because they did play pretty well in that game and just couldn't pull off the upset, and they were that close to pulling off the upset. So that's kind of the way I would look in that one. Obviously not strong in any way. Even weaker than that is these 2 college football games that are on tonight. Virginia's at Louisville. Louisville is up to a 21-point favorite from 19.5. Louisville looks like they have 75% of the cash, but 57% of the tickets are on Virginia. So it looks like Louisville is somehow kind of the market indicated team there. Looks like they're the team that's getting the money. I don't know what to think about that. If anything, Louisville, you can't really find value on them because they're up, they're ranked 11 now. They had a game where I thought they were kind of in a bad spot last week, and they were able to beat Virginia Tech quite easily. Virginia, I think, is coming off a blowout loss to Georgia Tech, so I don't see how there could be value on Louisville. Louisville's looked too good recently, pretty much. Virginia's looked, in their last game, they looked about as bad as they could, so I think, if anything, the stock is a little bit too high on Louisville there, so I don't know what else to say about that. All of these college football teams, by the way, they all played on Saturday, so they're all playing shortened weeks, having played on the 4th, and now they all have to play on the 9th on a Thursday, so that's a little bit odd. The other game is Southern Miss against Louisiana Lafayette, or University of Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. The Ragin' Cajuns look like they're down from 12.5 to 9.5 as a home favorite with 84% of the tickets, but only 67% of the cash. So it does look like there is some significant money, I guess, driving this number towards Southern Miss. Not quite sure what to think about that. I think Louisiana is sitting at 5 wins, so they do need one more to become bowl eligible. So that being the case, I don't think they would be in a spot to completely overlook Southern Miss team that's bad and they otherwise might overlook. Because they might be thinking, well, we need to get this win here just so we get this bowl eligibility at least. So I don't know what to think about that either. It's tough to really say anything about these. College basketball, there is a slate. I haven't really looked into many of these games, so it's tough to say. It's this early season where it's really tough to find anything that I really like this early. Who knows what to think about these games, really. And the transfer portal is kind of making things a little bit wilder and crazier in the early going, too, because you have more teams that have, different lineups. Prior to that, I think you'd see, more situations where, a smaller team would have, their whole lineup returning or whatever, whereas now you might see some of these smaller schools actually have some good, transfer player who came in, which is changing their starting lineup, which I think is kind of the case with, New Mexico. They have this one guy that came in from, Dayton, stuff like that. So I don't know what to think. New Mexico St. Mary's is maybe an interesting matchup, at least tonight, with St. Mary's being a ranked team and then having gone up from 2.5 to 4.5. I don't know. St. Mary's was in the tournament last year, but they got exited by UConn, and they have, I think, 3 returning starters from that team coming back. So I don't know. In New Mexico, Even though they do have one guy in their starting lineup as a transfer, and I think they might only have one or two starters that they had on their starting lineup last year from an NIT birth team. They made the NIT last year, and I think they were kind of a disappointed team once they got in there, and they got drilled by Utah Valley, I think, in the NIT. But I think they have maybe a couple starters, maybe only one returning from that team. But New Mexico has had some new faces come in, so they actually have four starting seniors on their team. It's just that, so that's kind of a team that I would tend to like to look at, except for the fact that I think they're guys that haven't really played with each other before. So that's kind of a weird situation. I don't know. I don't know what to think about any of this. NBA, there are two games. The Bucks are at the Pacers. The Bucks are sitting at around 3.5 as a favorite on the road. 93% of the tickets on them because, of course, they're the Milwaukee Bucks. They got Giannis. They're going to be the public team, but only 66% of the cash. That would make me sort of want to start looking at the Pacers, but Pacers played last night, and I thought they were in a spot where maybe they would not have a great game because they were coming off a 152-point outing against the Spurs, and they had this huge game up tonight. So I thought they might overlook the Jazz, but they put up 134. They've been putting up huge point totals, but their defense is kind of questionable. Indiana's is. But yeah, they showed up again after that huge point total that they put up against the Spurs. They showed up again last night and drilled Utah. And I think Utah did have a lead, or was much closer, like around the midway point in that game. They pulled away. But now they're playing a third game in 4 nights, a fourth game in 6, and a fifth and 7, actually, I think, but all at home. And this is going to finish the homestand. So, I mean, the market is seemingly indicating on Indiana. I think the situation is kind of less advantageous for them than the market seems to be signaling. I don't really know. Milwaukee, did they play last night? ESPN is like so slow to load, man. Yeah, they played last night and they barely got by the Detroit Pistons, so they kind of look a little bit worse than they actually are, maybe because of that game. They maybe just like thought they could just show up and win it, kind of an easier game. They're also facing a third game in 4 and a back-to-back, and those 3 all in different cities, having one at Brooklyn and then barely getting by Detroit, coming back home for a single-game homestand. So neither of these teams are really in good spots. I think Indiana's rest spot is maybe a little bit worse, but they don't have to travel, and Milwaukee kind of does, but Milwaukee's travel hasn't been that extreme, really, having to go to New York, and then and then they just played at home, and now they just have to go to Indiana first. I don't know. So that's tough to read. And then the other game is an even stranger game, I think, with Atlanta at Orlando. Is actually being played in Mexico City. I hate this, man. These leagues, the NFL keeps doing it, of course, and now I guess the NBA. I don't know how long the NBA has been doing it, but these leagues are like, they just have these international games like, hey, let's get some eyes on us. But it's just, you're not going to get like the best defensive performance probably in most of these cases out of these teams in situations like this, because it's such a weird travel spot. And in Mexico City is going into some like really crazy elevation too, so that's kind of a factor. Like, how are these teams going to adjust to the thinner atmosphere, the thinner oxygen, I should say, there? I don't know. Hawks have gone up from like a pick'em to a 3.5-point favorite in this game, but 93% of the tickets with only 90% of the cash on them. I don't know what to think about this really at all. What are these teams even coming off of? I don't know. I looked a little bit earlier, but I totally forget because I looked and I was like, I'm not playing this game. The Hawks lost at the Thunder, although that was kind of a game where I thought that they might show up for that game, where the Thunder, I thought, were kind of in a bad spot in that one. I forget exactly why, but they've had a couple days off to prepare for this one. But that game kind of broke their win streak that they were on. But also, now that they have some time off after that, maybe that'll help them refocus, and maybe they'll actually be focused on a Magic team that they might otherwise not be focused on. Whereas Orlando, let me see, they're coming off losing to Dallas by 15. They've had the same amount of time off, and that was after they returned home. And in the return home, they were able to beat the Lakers by 19. Pretty big win. And return home, not a great spot for Orlando, but it was a big opponent coming in there, and they handled them. And LA, I think maybe they were looking ahead to a Heat game. They had to play the Heat the next game, I believe. But then after that, Orlando looks like they played Dallas fairly competitively, I guess, losing by 15, a pretty good Dallas team. And now they break that. I don't know if you want to call that negative momentum. They have the same amount of days off, 2 days off, same as Atlanta. They do have Milwaukee up next, though. So, yeah, I mean, I think I guess, agree with the market move in this one that Atlanta is probably in the slightly better spot, at least, if not also the better team, which is why it's gone up from a pick. I think Atlanta is certainly the better team over Orlando. I mean, look, they have the same records, but I don't know how this line was a pick 'em at any point, really, unless there are injuries factoring in there. Because I think Atlanta was a playoff team last year. Orlando was kind of one of amidst the drags of the NBA, really. So I don't see how people couldn't, or how the books even could put that line out at a pick 'em, really. I don't know, but it does look like Atlanta's in the slightly better spot, I guess, based on what I'm seeing here. I don't want to touch it. I don't want any part of that. What I am going to touch, though, is two NHL games. One of them is going to be going against Tampa Bay, and I think this is the somewhat weaker of the two games, but I do like both of these. We're going against the Tampa Bay Lightning. They're returning home from a 4-game road trip, and they don't have much time off. They had to play the 4th, 6th, 7th, and now 9th. So this is going to be their 4th game in 6 days, and it's all in different cities. And they won 2 of those road games. They won at Ottawa. They lost in overtime in that attempt at revenge against Toronto, and they blew that lead and lost, which is a tough way to lose. Tampa still looking for that revenge against the team that eliminated them last year. Then they had to turn around the very next night, 2 nights ago, and go to Montreal, which I thought was kind of a bad spot for Tampa in that one, but I do think Montreal was returning from a road trip in that one, so it was a negative for both teams there, and Tampa got it done again, and they won that one. Now, 2 days later, they return home. They have to face a Chicago team that I don't think a lot of teams are going to really get up for. I mean, the Chicago team, they do have Bedard now. I mean, they made that. They got him on the roster now. They made that roster addition, so that gives them a little bit of hype. But even so, they were one of the worst teams in hockey last year. And even if they're slightly improved, they're still like a team might overlook, especially in a return home spot from a 4-game road trip, which is what Tampa's on here with very little rest. They've had 1 day off to return from the road trip, but prior to that, they played 3 out of those prior 4 days and 4 out of those prior 6 days. So this is kind of a tough spot for them. I guess it's a 5th game in 8 days now for them, or whatever it is, and a 4th and 6th, all in different cities. And they have Carolina up next, who's starting to turn it on and kind of look more like that playoff team that we saw last year out of Carolina. So that's kind of a bigger game. That's a big Eastern Conference matchup on Saturday. So this is a spot where I think Tampa could potentially look past the Blackhawks here. And that's what I'm looking at here. It's a big line here. The Blackhawks, they're coming off a loss to the New Jersey Devils. And, of course, they're a below 500 team, so that adds to what I said, where it's possible that a team like Tampa might look past them a little bit. Chicago has more time off, having not played since the 5th, so they're in the much better rest spot with a bunch of days off. And they were at home when they lost to the Devils, and that was coming off of a nice win over a Florida team that is a potential playoff team again, and were last year, and of course made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. So coming off that Florida win for Chicago, they might have been in a down spot, having to play the very next day against New Jersey. Lost that game. New Jersey's a pretty good team. No real shame in that. They do have Florida up next, but that's only coming up in 3 days. I think you're going to be focused on like a Tampa Bay team that's another like one of the kind of name teams in the Eastern Conference, and you have multiple days off, and you get to get out of home after you had that loss in your final home game. So I think that helps break that momentum a little bit and refocus. So I think situationally, this is one that lines up quite a bit on Chicago. That's why I'm on it. Tampa looks like they've gone down a bit from minus 255 to minus 245. It's a big money line home favorite, but it looks like they have 99% of the cash and 95% of the tickets. I don't think that's accurate. I think when all is said and done here and you see the actual market numbers come out, I think it'll be more indicative that there's more market agreement with Chicago on this one, I would say, because there are just too many situational factors like I just described. But because the line is so big here, this is going to be a play on the Chicago Blackhawks puck line, plus 1.5 goals. I was able to find it at minus 113, so really close to right around that minus 110, like vig. I would be in like the ballpark of like a minus 115 juice that I'd be looking for on this one for the Chicago puck line. And then when you do that, of course, put a little bit of the bet on the money line as well. Because if you think they're going to cover that puck line, you're saying you pretty much think there's like a decent chance that they might be able to win outright and that they're being undervalued in that way as well. So that's play number one, the Chicago Blackhawks plus 1.5 goals on the puck line. The other game I think might be stronger, even though the market looks like it's kind of flip-flopped to disagree with me here, but I think this is a bad spot for the Los Angeles Kings. They played last night, and they had a big win over the Vegas Knights. They won 4-1, and that was their last game of a road trip, a 4-game road trip that took them out to Eastern Canada and the Eastern U.S., actually. Toronto, Ottawa, Philadelphia. Then they did have 3 days off before playing Vegas. So it was like almost like sort of a return home-ish, because Vegas is not that far away from LA, of course, but it was still a final game of a road trip, and it's against Vegas, the returning champs. So as the LA Kings, you're certainly going to get up for that game, and they did, and they played well. The game was closer than the final score indicates, at least. Statistically, it was a pretty close game, but that's a big win for the Kings. Now with no turnaround time, even though they did have a lot of rest going into that game, now they're on a back-to-back, coming off a monster win, and they have to face the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Kings are an 8-2 team, and Pittsburgh's 8-2, and Pittsburgh's 5-6. So first of all, people might look at that and think, like, how are the LA Kings only favored by a little bit here? They should be the better team, right? They have the better record, and they're at home, so why are they getting, like, even less than home ice advantage here? Why is the line basically saying that it's almost saying that Pittsburgh's even the better team here? That's because I think that might be the case. I think there's not much that separates these two teams. I don't think LA is that much better than Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has had an extra day off, at least. They had a nice break between the 4th and the 7th, so they're fairly rested, at least, as well. They played that one game after that, and that was the first game they played on the 4th. There was a tune-up to start this road trip here against San Jose, an easy win there. I mean, it's San Jose, the lowly Sharks, poor Sharks. Then they had a couple days off and then went into Anaheim. And I thought that was a bad spot for Anaheim in that one, because Anaheim was coming off a win against the Golden Knights. So that was a bad spot for Anaheim. And that was, they dealt the Knights their first regulation loss. And maybe the Knights are a bit hung over from that going into the Kings game, maybe, because that was the first regulation loss. So it's maybe a situation where they lost the game twice. But LA certainly got up for that one. But anyway, Pittsburgh beat Anaheim when Anaheim was in that bad spot, took advantage of that. Now they get to face LA, who's also in a bad spot, and this is their final game on this road trip. And I think Pittsburgh, because they're 5-6, I think they're going to feel it, and they want to get to that 500, want to get to that 6-6. There's a little bit of extra motivation there. I think when you can feel that and get that 500, having started the road trip at 3-6, it would be nice to have that full sweep of the road trip there. And this is the best team they're facing on the road trip, the LA Kings. The LA Kings are in a massive letdown spot and a return home spot, so negatives coming in there, and a back-to-back. So that's difficult, and the line here is just LA minus 125 on the money line. Like I said, it almost looks too easy to take LA, the team with the much better record at home, where the line basically is like only home ice and nothing else. So it's like, why are the books telling you that these teams are basically even when there's such a record discrepancy? It's because Pittsburgh is better than the start to their season would indicate, but the market looks a little weird here with 75% of the tickets, but only 68% of the cash on the Pittsburgh Penguins. I don't know why that's the case. I think we might see that shift because, like I said, I think this is obviously a letdown spot and not a good spot for the LA Kings at all here. I'm taking the Penguins in the much better spot as the underdog here at the underdog price plus 115. I think there is value there. So the two plays tonight, both in the NHL, Chicago Blackhawks plus 1.5 goals on the puck line at minus 113 VIG, and the Pittsburgh Penguins plus 115 on the money line. I like these situations in both cases. Let's get it. Let's get back on a hot streak, man. I mean, I've been doing pretty well overall with a couple of big days mixed in there recently, so I'm happy about it. Let's do it. Peace. Have a good day. I was not flipping you off. I was just pointing. Yeah, index finger, not middle. Peace.